Welcome back. It's Swing Pass. I'm Adam Ruffner. That is Evan Lepler. We are breaking down the biggest news from around the Ultimate Frisbee Association. And with just 3 weeks to go until the start of the 2025 season, boy, howdy, do we have a lot to get to. Earlier today, and we are recording this on Thursday, April 3rd, the UFA announced 2 new league sponsors, including a new title sponsor, Pabst Light, as well as a one-of-its-kind cannabis sponsorship with True Leave. Some money in the door, some excitement from new businesses to work with for the league. But that's kind of to the side as far as what we talk about on this show. Evan, you've been going around the league and talking to a variety of coaches from respective teams, getting a lay of the land as we barrel towards opening pull. What have you been uncovering talking with the head signal callers from around the UFA?
Yeah, Adam, it's good to be with you again, and hard to believe we're just 3 weeks from opening day. It's coming up really quick. It's always a really fun time of year for me to try to canvas the league and kind of learn like what each team's new secrets are and the new storylines that go with it, whether it's a player that switched teams or a guy that was a rookie last year that's taken on a much bigger role, how they're replacing a departed star, and just kind of what the feel is around the league. I think in the past week, I've had 30 to 60-minute conversations with 9 different coaches. So over a third of the league, and I'm going to be reaching out to more in the weeks ahead. It's the season of optimism. I mean, no matter who you talk to, everyone's feeling pretty good about their squad. Everyone likes their pieces, and teams usually look pretty good when they're playing against themselves. And also, teams are ready to play other teams. Like that's been a common thread. Everyone is excited to see how they stack up. So I don't think, most coaches are pretty realistic, but most coaches understandably set high goals and have high expectations for their teams. Like there are teams that you and I would probably pick to finish third or fourth in their division that are talking like, yeah, here's what we need to do to make it to championship weekend. We believe we have the pieces to do it. So it's a fun time around the league. I don't know if there's like a big breaking news headline from the conversations that I've had. I'd say one of the most interesting dynamics, and I've written about it already, is just the number of new coaches around the league.
Mm-hmm.
Like I had a really nice chat with Caleb Merriam, the new leader for the Oakland Spiders. I talked earlier today to Michael Avila, the new leader of the Carolina Flyers. He's got a really interesting story. It's interesting, Adam. Both Avila and Merriam, like the bulk of their current recent coaching experience is high school and YCC. So, and like, look, we've seen a lot of coaches coach pros and coach youth, and like that's not totally abnormal in Frisbee. Anthony Nunez for the New York Empire has coached YCC since he started Devil in 2007. But like, you think about what it means to be a coach, and it's a very different thing if you're working with 16, 17-year-olds who are learning the game versus a team of pros. Like, and then for Avila, a team of pros that went to the finals last year and is
Right.
like trying to take that next step again. So, yeah, there are more interesting storylines than ever around the league. I venture to say there's more optimism from coaches than ever around the league. And, the great Mike Tyson quote, everyone has a plan until you get punched in the face. We're
I
going to
love
get
that
to
one.
see teams get hit for the first time 3 weeks from now. And yeah, I can't wait to get things started.
Obviously, you can't take everything Tyson says at full face value, but I've always loved that quote as well, that rubber meets the road sense, right? Like you can talk yourself up in your head as much as you want, but that glove meets face and it's a whole different story. I want to go back a second and talk what you were mentioning about Oakland and Carolina kind of taking aspects of their youth culture and bringing it into the professional scenes. I mean, I think we've seen in both the case for the Spiders out in Oakland and the Flyers in Carolina, those teams have really benefited in recent years from the absolute onslaught of young talent emerging in their respective locations. And I think it's kind of interesting and intriguing to me that the people who were sort of seeding much of the top level talent that is coming out of those places are now going to be able to, I think, influence more of the strategy of those products that they helped bring into the sport, right? So, we've talked at length, I think, well, you and I behind the scenes, not on the show, but we've talked at length about Oakland and how they just kind of keep churning in new crops of really interesting young talent. Now, can they kind of make it a little bit more cohesive? And then you have Carolina, who, just went through a little bit of a scare in the offseason. They lose some all UFA talent in Anders Jungs, Henry Fisher, and a couple other retirees. And yet there's no real, I think, fear there as to what kind of competitor the Flyers are going to be in 2025, given who's still staying around. And given that every single year it feels like they bring up 2 to 5 rookies that are all of a sudden, names we can't get out of our mouths enough by the end of the season. And so I think it's really interesting what you're saying about Avila Merriam, and, just in general, I was wondering, we have so many new coaches, but we also have kind of these old guard types that have been in the league for a long time. Do any of these newer coaches remind you of any of the more traditional head coaches we've seen in this league? Do you have any sort of, glances or wisps of, oh, this does kind of remind me of, a Denardis, a DeBile, a Silverstein?
It's a good question, and I think Jake Spyro is going to have some characteristics of Tim DeBile because he coached under him for a long time.
Well, yeah, and they're best friends and they order the same
Yeah,
drink at the bar. Of course, they're going to share a little bit of the same. But I was just curious if anyone reminds you of anybody else within this league, or do you kind of see a lot of these coaches as their own entity or enigma or whatever word you want to use to describe for them?
yeah. I mean, I think each coach, and I've said this about broadcasters too. Like each coach is a conglomeration, which is a word I like, of all the
Mm-hmm.
coaches that they've played for, worked with, watched, studied, and then their own personality and desires mixed into that too. And like I've said that about broadcasting, like as a broadcaster, I am a mix of the 50 broadcasters that I most respect with my own personality mixed in. So it's hard to answer that question now because I haven't like seen any of these new coaches
Well,
coach a game. But
sure.
from a track record standpoint, it's hard to say. Like Caleb Merriam, he hasn't just coached YCC. He's also coached Cal Poly Slow, who he played for. He's a relatively younger guy. And there are other new coaches that I haven't talked to yet that I'm excited to talk to. So, yeah, that's a tough question. I do think the other interesting thing about this time of the season is like starting to hear the names of the guys that we don't know yet. Like
Mm-hmm.
probably a third of the teams in the league have like an 18-year-old high school senior who like
Mm-hmm.
you and I probably haven't heard of yet, but he's going to like be in the active 20 on opening day. Like we've seen teams integrate that type of player in the past, whether it's Jacques Nissen or Thomas Schoep, and like those new guys, like the Empire have a guy who could be, is not definitely going to be, but like could be an 18-year-old in their active 20 for the opening game at Oakland. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
super fun because you know that 5, 6, 7, 10 years from now, this is the type of guy that could be, all UFA candidate, backbone of the organization type guy. So it's fun to hear coaches, get excited to share information about like, yeah, you haven't seen this guy yet, but look out. Here's the story, and it's those are fun stories to tell.
Yeah, I mean, it feels kind of like the Star Lab in elementary school or something, with the way that these teams will project out into the night sky, sort of the prospects of these young players, right? Like it's always this breathless excitement about, oh, you've got to see this kid, and it's really exciting right now when it's kind of behind the veil of, that it's just practices and word of mouth. But I agree, once you hit the field and you start getting into all the nitty gritty of the games, it just presents a wildly different sort of reality, I think. And for the new coaches, new players, as well as us, it's just going to be a lot to unpack as we, again, are just 3 weeks away from opening poll 2025. And with that, I think it's a good point to get into the meat of this episode and trying to answer some of the big questions that are entering into the new season. Now, Evan and I have each selected three apiece, a nice little six pack, if you
Yeah.
will,
A
of
Pabst Light six pack.
thank you very much, of questions that we would like to see possibly answered. I don't know if we necessarily have the answers, as we often do on the show. I don't know if we have those, but I think that they're worthwhile things to think about heading towards the season. And I know you've kind of got the big one to kick us off. And I think it kind of encapsulates what we've been discussing on this show and analyzing throughout the offseason, which is who the heck is going to be the best team going into 2025, right?
Well, that wasn't my question, Adam.
Well,
You're
clarify me.
taking one of the words away. I didn't ask who's the best team going into 2025. My first
Okay.
question is, which team would you consider the most talented team in the league heading into 2025? And as you know, those are often two different things. So where does your mind go when you think of who is the most talented team in the league? We've talked about the depth of talent. We've talked about the balance in number of different contenders. But if you're just lining up, let's say the top 20 or top 25 or even top 30, who's the most talent?
Oh man, I gotta answer it right off the bat. That's tough. Again, like this has been kind of the single biggest burning question, at least in the back of my mind, is which of these dang rosters is actually capable of the highest ceiling? I think right now, what stands out in my mind, just point blank, are Chicago and Boston. I think you just look top to bottom, the depth, the stars, the starting line talent, the kinds of skills that they have, particularly throwing and speed on both of those rosters and size. There's just a lot of lineups that they can throw at their opponents that I don't think that other teams will be able to respond to in the ways that they like. It feels like Chicago and Boston's rosters have the most possibility to dictate in any given matchup what they want to be doing on the field. That's where I kind of start with analyzing talent. But, we could have a 10-part series breaking down what talent means within the sport. Because kind of like we were just saying about, talking with coaches and the hype of the preseason, there's a lot of notions and I think observations that we can make in the abstract and in practices that don't necessarily apply on the field. And I think we're seeing that more and more within the league, right? And I think that's especially been the case within the last 2 to 3 year window when these new defensive rules, the new pulling, some of the adjustments to game clock have really come into play to speed up play. We're seeing less and less of these most talented teams simply win to chalk, take advantage of a potential overmatched opponent. And instead, we're seeing, I think, a little bit more of strategy, team buy-in, chemistry prevailing at the end of the day. And so, again, kind of getting back to the central point, what do we mean when we say talent? Is it just depth? Is it most stars on like a universe line, 7-person rotation? What do you kind of look at when you start talking about most talent? And also, who do you see as the most talented team entering 2025?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the greatest collection of great players. I mean,
But
I don't
what
want to.
does that mean? The greatest collection of great players. What's a great player? Who like
A great player is great at multiple things, but versatile and capable of filling a role at the highest level. That's what I think of when I talk about talent. And I think you're overcomplicating it a little bit. I
well
will
yeah.
say that the team that I have in mind is not one of the two teams that you mentioned. Before I mention my team, can I get you to make a declarative choice?
No,
Boston
I'm
or
splitting it.
Chicago?
No, Boston or Chicago.
You've got a
We're good.
tie.
You don't get to hide your pick behind a little curtain and ask me
Oh,
to choose between two teams who one has the MVP and the other has like 4 candidates for it going into 2025. I'm going to split this one. What's your pick, Evan?
I think the team that we considered the most talented team in the league last year is still the most talented team. And just because they had a miserable Friday night in the Salt Lake City wind doesn't mean that they aren't still the most talented team. And obviously, I'm talking about the DC Breeze.
Hmm.
And yes, they lost some talent. They lost Johnny Malks and they lost Elliot Bonet. But ho hum, they get Christian Boxley back, all UFA caliber player. They add Aiden Downey, the Callahan winner from Georgia. They won't get him until after the college season ends, but for the meat of the season, they haven't had Jock Nissen during the college season really ever, at least since he was in high school. Think about that. And now they get Jacques Nissen all year long. He's a captain. He's an anchor. And look, I mean, it's not fun to just go and there's this guy and this guy. Like I could run down 25 different names, but I think
Hmm.
the fact that like if I were going to run down names of the DC Breeze, how many names would I get to before I said, Miles Grovick, who could very well be the defensive player of the year this year. Now he's dealing with
I
some health
really like
issues.
Grovick. I'll pump the brakes a little there. I mean, we got Lucas Ambrose still in this league. All due respect to
I
Miles.
understand.
All
I
right, all
understand.
right. Miles had
That's
a
how
terrific
highly
season last year.
That's how highly I regard a guy like
Was
Grovick, who
Miles
had.
Grovick a top 3 defender on his team last year when you consider Jasper Tom, Troy Holland? I mean, just for sake of debate, we don't have to answer it here, but I like Grovick as much as anybody. Just defensive player of the year is the best defender out of 600 odd athletes. It's a real top point, real rarefied air up there.
No question.
Okay,
He's
okay.
I believe he's a special player. And I think that speaks
He is.
to
We can agree on
their
that. He
depth
is.
of talent. He won't turn 22 until August 21st on the eve of championship weekend. And it just speaks to like not only do they add Christian Boxley back, they add Musa Ja and Alexandre Fall back, two
Mm-hmm.
game changing type of defenders as well.
Yep.
I spoke with Lauren Boyle this past week. There's a core of young guys coming up from the DC, Virginia, Maryland area college scene. They're going to add some other young talent. And, like we haven't even mentioned Thomas Edmonds or Rowan McDonald or Cole Jurek. Like, this is just a really deep, talented team. I think they were largely considered the favorite going into championship weekend.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want to overly diminish them because of the loss that they had last year. I think their and it's not like, yes, their talent is great, and that was the question, but it's the talent, it's their tradition and culture of winning, which is superior to Chicago and Boston, and frankly, any other team in the league right now, like DC men's ultimate. Just because they struggled in the win at championship weekend doesn't mean that they aren't still the premier men's ultimate city heading into the 2025 UFA season. So, yeah, I mean, obviously, like there are a lot of really talented teams, and DC needs to prove it on paper, prove it in games. It's not just a thing on paper, but I really like their depth. I really like their maturity. I like the younger guys moving into bigger roles. I like the pieces they've added, and I think they can pretty easily fill the holes of the guys they left, which is a crazy statement. I get it because like Johnny Malks is one of the best players in the league, and Elliot
Mm-hmm.
Bonet was like number 2 on the team in goals and number 2 or 3 in total yardage or receiving yards, whatever the numbers are. But I believe they have the pieces to step in. And I also think there's something to the fact, and this is getting a little bit aside from answering the question directly, but there's something to the fact of experiencing that painful, excruciating ending that they had last year and having that drive and motivation. Like we see that in sports. It doesn't always work out this way, but a team get punched in the face when it really counts, and then they come back a year later better off for it. So yeah, I'm feeling higher on DC than I maybe was, in the dead of winter when I kind of
Sure.
still had their performance against Minnesota foremost in mind. Like this is a really strong team that was the favorite going into championship weekend this year. And if you ask me right now, I would probably think they'll be the favorite going into championship weekend this year as well.
Yeah. No, I think you make great points, and I don't think there's anything wrong with stating that DC is the most talented team. I think part of why we came up with this question, right, is that you could choose 5 or 6 teams with pretty
Yeah.
good logic around them being the most talented. And I think your points about their ability to sort of solve some of the roster subtractions that they had with their new additions is spot on. I mean, you talk about Boxley, Downey, Fall, Ja being added. Those are starters on any team in the league. I think what brings up a problem for me with DC isn't just that they lost a single game, which I agree. I've probably personally attached too much meaning to a single result. It was how they lost. Every single team, I think, within this league is capable of losing one bad game, per season. And unfortunately for DC last year, it was the most important one. I think what has put doubt in my head about where exactly their talent matches up with their successes is they came apart so quickly once things got rigorous and tough in the wind, and their opponent was a Minnesota team that loves the slop like pigs and will just run up break scores if you're not careful and be, windmill spiking it after they dumped in a 5-yard pass to take their 4-1 lead. Like, they were really rubbing DC in the early Breeze mistakes. And I was just surprised, to bring up your Tyson quote from earlier, how DC responded to that smash in the middle of their face. They came unraveled. They were swarming head coach Lauren Boyle on the sideline. She it was like watching somebody be descended on by seagulls or something at a beach when you're holding bread, where it's just everyone's coming up with a statement or an answer or something that they need to opine about. And it's like, where is the composure of this Breeze team? This Breeze team has been squaring off against New York, again and again throughout their dynasty, and showing absolute rigidity as far as, combating a bigger opponent and knowing what the stakes are. And then they play this Minnesota team who they think that they're better than, they think that they're better than, maybe know that they are. And it doesn't match up. And so I kind of wanted to brook this into the discussion around talent. And, what do we mean by talent? To me, it's what is your team's superpower? Not just naming guys on the roster. Oh, I like this as a piece. Oh, he plays well. He's got good stats. But what do these pieces kind of assemble into and represent as a bigger whole? And like for last year, DC's superpower was team passing. And unfortunately, in their biggest game of the year, the wind chill got an 8th defender in the wind, and it just kind of undid and blew over the strength of this Breeze team. And so going into 2025, I'm just wondering, is that still their superpower? Team completion rating, kind of athletic team speed as well. This is a very fast Breeze roster. And will that be able to stand the test of a full regular season and playoffs again? Again, I completely agree with you. They are one of the most pedigreed franchises in the entire UFA. I think they do hold the current longest active playoff streak at around 8 years, 9 years. It's been every year since 2015 or 2016, I
Yeah.
believe.
Flyers are right there too.
Yeah. I think they're both tied at 9
Yeah.
seasons consecutively apiece. So they have their kind of pedigree. I just wonder, in given single game settings, is their skill, their team strength, their superpower greater than, say, Boston's size and athleticism, or kind of matchup defense prowess, or Minnesota and their team defense, or Carolina and their offensive both playmaking as well as kind of consistency throughout the years. Like, I guess
Yeah.
that's my question for a team like DC. I can't sit here and really argue with you about their talent.
Well, and it's not an unfair question at all. I lean toward the track record, and I also lean toward the culture that they have. And I mean, they're gonna have a different plan the next time they go into a game with conditions like they encountered a championship weekend. Like
Totally.
they have spent an off season learning the lessons, enduring the pain from those lessons and those memories. I just pulled up the stats from that game, and I like Minnesota clearly outplayed them. We forget that DC was down and then came back. Like
Oh,
they're
I
down
don't forget.
ten
I was
six.
going to bring that up.
They're down 10-6 at the half. They tied it at 11s. They dominated the third quarter, and then it was a disastrous start to the fourth quarter. And it's
Mhm.
crazy. I mean, DC completed 87% of its passes in that game, which was far better than Minnesota, who was 82%. Like for Minnesota to win that game at championship weekend with an 82%. But, they like DC tried to play it small ball and they completed 259 passes, which was 101 more completions than Minnesota had, but it obviously was not good enough. I think they will learn their lesson. And look, I'm not saying like they're definitely going to win the championship, but I think they have the most talent, and on paper, we should respect that going into the season. That's my take.
Yeah. No,
We've been
I
on
think
this
it's a
for a while, though. We should go on to question number two.
We should. And, I wanted to talk about, again, kind of superpowers. And I think where we should most aptly start is with the reigning champions and kind of how they conquered the league last year. The Minnesota Wind Chill. It felt like their biggest strength was their team defense, not only in terms of just its starting line talent. I mean, they effectively had two starting lines of defenders, but also their depth and their talent allowed them to adapt to their opponents. They could kind of throw out different sorts of coverage units depending on what they wanted to stymie in their opposition's attack. And just to kind of run through where this wind chill defense ended their 2024 season, here are some of the just top 5 finishes for this team. They were third overall in break rate, fourth overall in goals allowed per game, third lowest opponent huck percentage at just over 53%, second lowest offensive success rate at just over 42%, third lowest opponent red zone rate. They were only allowing opponents to convert just over 75% of their red zone opportunities. That is stingy. Second in blocks per game, and that includes 9 games with 10 or more blocks, including each of the last 4 performances of the season. That is all of their playoff games. So their entire championship run was fueled by this defense generating break opportunities. And they were 4th overall in breaks per game. And this is all accomplished when they only had the 16th best defensive conversion rate. And what I'm saying by that is Minnesota took advantage of this absolute volume of break opportunities as only the 16th best team. They were bottom 10 in the league last year at converting on their break chances. If they even improve that to like 9th or 10th this year, it feels like they've got a bunch more ceiling that they could expand into. And then you talk about the additions of an all defense member, Justin Burnett, James Pollard, one of the best deep bigs, pulling throwers in the entire UFA. I mean, they've completely reloaded after last year. They have all this young talent that's only getting better. It just feels like Minnesota has the best defense in the league, and that superpower, I think, situates them within the top 4 somewhere entering the season. Regardless of how you feel about talent, regardless of how you feel about the offseason moves, this Minnesota team just feels formidable once again, even if on any given week there might be some variability in the results.
Yeah, I think you make a really good case. You kind of answer the question without asking it. The question, does Minnesota have the best defense in the league? And I think they're certainly amongst the contenders. You mentioned the one stat that makes me a little nervous about declaring that they have the best defense in the league, which was their defensive conversion rate last year, bottom
Mm-hmm.
10 in the league, 16th out of 24. Um, I think Justin Burnett is going to help with that immensely. I think
Mm-hmm.
he is going to be an engine for this Minnesota team after a turn. And frankly, James Pollard as well. Like, Pollard is a guy that was a defender for Philly. And then the past few years, they basically put him on offense and made him kind of the fulcrum of everything that they did as a cutter and as a hucker. And I would be really excited to see Pollard just kind of go back to his roots as a top tier defender, a guy that can go deep after a turn, but you have to respect his throws as well. I think part of the defensive conversion rate being lower is the fact that they play at Seafoam Stadium and there's a lot of wind
Mhm.
there, and there's just the Central Division kind of breeds that brand of ultimate. Um, in terms of whether they are the best shutdown defense in the league
I didn't
and the
say
best,
shut down. I didn't
okay,
say
the best
best
overall
defense.
defense.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
in my encapsulation, depth, availability very much has to play into that formula.
yeah. I mean, I think a team like Chicago is going to be one of the best
Yeah.
defenses as well to kind of challenge them in that regard. Uh, I think Carolina is going to have another really strong defense. Um, Drew Swanson, John Wellers, Christian Belis, like they've got, those three guys were all Flyers first year players last year. They're all back. They're adding in new players as well. They've One thing about the Flyers, they've got a lot of guys that like could play O or could play D. Like,
Hmm.
Ethan Bloodworth and Elijah Long. They could play every single O point during the season. They could play every single D point during the season. They could be really good no matter what roles they're in.
Right.
Um, so it's hard to know exactly what they're going to do right now. I expect the DC Breeze to have a really strong defense with some of the names that I've already mentioned and kind of their core of guys that can get in handlers' heads, whether it's Thomas Edmonds or Jasper Tom or David Bloodgood. Like, that's a really great foundation of a D line with AJ Merriman kind of leading the core of downfield cutter defenders. So, I don't know if I'm ready to say that I think Minnesota has the best defense in the league. I think they're absolutely among the best defenses. I think Minnesota's defense is really well coached. I think,
Hmm.
we talk a lot about Ben Feldman, but his staff of assistants do a really good job and, don't really seek much of the credit, but they have become one of the most prepared and thoughtful teams about the
Hmm.
ways they attack, the way they use the UFA rules to their benefit. So I think that is certainly a feather in Minnesota's cap that helps to elevate their talent with great intelligence. And so, if we're going to call Minnesota the best defense in the league, that's a huge factor. But yeah, I don't know. Like, I still think Minnesota is an interesting team after a turn with the D line that they had. And remember, last year we didn't see like the normal Minnesota D line. Like, it was hard to know what was an O point and what was a D point because there were so many turns in those games. But it was like, all right, Josh Klain, shoot it deep. Like, Josh played more D points in the championship weekend than he had played in the previous 10 years of his career. Like, it was
Hmm.
insane in that regard. So, yeah, I think Minnesota's a top five defense, maybe a top three defense. They need to do more to show me that they are the best defense. And I mean, they're going to
What
have
would that
chances to
be
do so.
though? Because I mean, you're talking about a team, a defense that succeeds basically at every level of their coverages. I mean, they're top three in red zone, lowest red zone percentage. They're top three in lowest opponent hucking percentages. So short range and deep, they're one of the best. Their actual, I feel like, teeth of the defense is within the middle of the field. You talk about their defenders, Dylan DeClerc, Brett Bergmeyer, Brandon Mattis, Cameron Lacey. They all feast on that middle part of the field where they can read and react and kind of anticipate throws going into that space. They've got some of the best team defense. They've got these up and coming Thomas Shope sort of prospects that look to be the next generation. I guess I'm curious if not Minnesota, who kind of has strengths everywhere, what do you see as being the best defense and why? I mean, I don't disagree that DC, Boston, Chicago could absolutely occupy that stuff. I think it's a very ill-defined metric, right? Best defense. But
Yeah, no, I
what
think
do those teams succeed at in terms of holistic coverage over Minnesota? Because to me, it's like DC excels at handler defense specifically. You talk about Bloodgood, Jasper Tom, AJ Merriman. They really set in and clamp down on what teams like to do in their reset space on the swing passes. That's what they did so effectively against Boston. Felt like in the East Division title game last year. Chicago, terrific athletes, right? They get tons of blocks. They're much better at defensive conversion rate and much more tidy in punching in those break chances. But at times, it did feel like they had trouble slowing down the A option on any given team. So I guess I'm just curious, like, what would
well
then
that was
demonstrate to
before
you the
they
best
had
defense?
Nate Goff, William Wettengel, and Xavier Payne and
But
Timothy
those are just
Shock and
names right now. To take nothing away from their talent, I just feel like defense specifically is so much more than just the talent that it assembles on a given line. It is about that chemistry, that communication, knowing where someone is without having to look at or verbally instruct them. And that's where I see the systemic advantage of Minnesota over Chicago. It's not to say if you just were to line up the rosters side by side that you wouldn't maybe pick Chicago's. It's the fact that these wind chill players have been within this Max Longchamp, Ben Feldman, Kelsey Percy system for numerous years and know exactly what to be doing at any given time. That to me is a big advantage over the opposition.
I think you're absolutely right, and those are great points. My thought is I can't separate defensive system from conversion rate because converting the breaks is such a huge part of the game, even though you
Sure.
can take a timeout and get the O line on the field. And I like the guys that are going to be handling the disc on DC's D line and Chicago's D line better than I like the guys handling the disc on Minnesota's D line, with the caveat that we haven't seen Justin Burnett yet be an engine for the wind chill, and I fully expect him to be a difference maker. And I'm very open to this opinion changing as the season gets rolling. But yeah, that's kind of where I stand right now.
No, and
Going to
that
be interesting.
that's all totally fair. There's so much to tackle as far as discussing defense. Not only is there the coverage, there's a whole counter attack. It's a very two truths
The
at the same time kind of element.
the one thing that neither of us mentioned, which is ridiculous, is that
Mm-hmm.
one of the reasons that Minnesota is a contender and very well might have the best defense. If the question was who has the best pullers in the league and who has the best
Yep.
defensive coverage off the pull, I mean,
Thank
I
you.
don't know who's like we're talking about who's second, and I have no idea who it would be because Minnesota has been the strongest and most innovative and most efficient and consistent team in that regard, and it's gotten them a lot of breaks.
Right. And we talk about DC falling apart in the beginning of that semifinal game. That was largely instituted by these deep pinning pulls from the Minnesota defense, staggering the Breeze offense so far back in their own end zone. They've got to complete 30 yards of passes in this ridiculous win just to get it up to the break mark, right? Just to
Yeah.
get it up to the touchback point. I mean, Minnesota has revolutionized the idea of starting field position within this league. And you're absolutely right. It needs to be front and center when we talk about the strength of this Minnesota team. But
Yeah.
we've still got, I believe, four questions
Yeah,
to
we,
get
we gotta
to.
we
So
gotta
we
go
got to,
speed version a little bit.
yeah, we gotta
Uh,
crack open a few more. So you've
my
got your
my
next
second
one.
my second question: which international edition? And to be clear, I'm not talking about just the guys who are first year players. Which foreign player will make the biggest impact in the UFA in 2025? I feel like there are more international editions than ever. We got guys who are back. We got guys who switch teams. We got guys who are big names in Europe making their UFA debuts. It's not who are you most excited to see, Adam. It's who is going to make the biggest impact in the 2025 season. Who you got?
And I got to choose one. Like, this has got to be the toughest question to pick one. It's just choosing one of the incredible assemblage of international stars we've got playing in the league in 2025. Shoot. I mean, I think the obvious pick could be Tobe DeCrona, joining Boston, reigning rookie of the year, one of the most exciting players in the globe right now, figures to be, front and center in the most competitive divisional playoff race in the league in the East Division. You've got Don DeMarais joining Chicago as a rookie this year. He's the reigning European Athlete of the Year on the open side, according to ultraworld.com. So that's another name I think you got to put at the front. I'm going to choose someone who was a rookie last year and was so instrumental to one of the semifinalists. I just love his all-around game, and he's already shown it to us. And I think given where Seattle enters the season in a very competitive West Division, his play will be central to their success again. I'm talking about Aaron Wolf on the Seattle Cascades. I mean, in terms of two-way talent, a thrower, an athlete, somebody who can go into coverage should your offensive unit turn it over, I don't know that we saw too many other players generally last year, not just international, but players within the league who showcased a better all-around skill set than him. And again, given what Seattle needed from him, I couldn't have been more impressed for him in his first season. And now he gets to come back even more comfortable within that Cascade system playing for Vegas Johnson. Like, I really like that guy. He showed me a ton of grit last year, and I'm somebody who loves the kind of playing outside of just the stats. We could talk about his very impressive stat numbers from last year, but he was such a gamer for them. He showed up so huge for them in countless situations, just a backbone of their offense. I'm going to say it's Wolf right now. I just think given that we don't know what to expect in that West Division, Seattle's got a bunch to prove after their semifinals appearance against the Flyers last year and defending their West Division throne. I think he's going to be massively instrumental. And it's also a way for me to kind of step back from having to choose some of these other guys, these rookie international stars who are going to be coming into our league. You talk about DeMarais, Karklands in Toronto, half of the Toronto roster at this point. But who do you have? I mean, this is another one of those questions we could have just blossomed into an entire episode on its own. And we probably will be just talking about the international effect in this league every single week, depending on what kind of star performances we see.
I think Wolf is an astute, under the radar pick. He's really good at the little things in a way that are kind of hard to quantify. Like, they moved him onto the O-line just because he's good at breaking the mark and doing simple, fundamental offensive things that helped Seattle's O-line find a new gear last year. I don't feel like Aaron Wolf is like the big time, huge highlight playmaker that some of these other guys are going to be. The one thing I want to mention is it's pretty amazing that so many times foreign players come to the UFA and adapt way more quickly than we would expect. Like, I could make a case like, well, yeah, I'm going to go with Toba because it's his second year in the league, and Arvids is in his first year, and Don DeMarais is in his first year, and those guys are still figuring things out. But, like, did it take a long time for Elliot Bonet to adjust to being a member of the DC Breeze O-line last year? Like,
No.
We saw Akifumi Moraoka and 18-year-old Ben Ort, like, become really steady contributors in year one with the Toronto Rush. We saw Aaron Wolf do it with the Seattle Cascades last year. Toba in Montreal, like the rookie of the year, coming from Belgium, having never really played in the U.S. before. So I just like it. It really is astonishing that these international players can come in and make strong impacts so quickly without having like the years of continuity and chemistry that so many of these other teams in their systems have. I just wanted to mention that at the start because I was thinking about like how to answer this question.
All right. Now you got to just get to the answer. This has been a preamble. You make me square up and answer these questions. Who is the most impactful international star in 2025?
Okay, the answer is Arvids Karklins, and here's
All
why.
right.
He is a super powerful player. He can do it all. He has been considered the most talented player in Europe. Uh, he hasn't always shown it at all times. He's certainly not the most consistent player in Europe, but in terms of having that high ceiling and having the most responsibility, like I don't know exactly what Arvid's availability is going to be and how many games he's going to play, but I do expect that when he's on the field, you're never going to forget that he's on the field. And like
Mm-hmm.
Boston will have the luxury of, hey, Toba, go be a decoy. We're going to run this play for Simon Carapella.
Mm-hmm.
And obviously, Chicago could do the same thing with Don DeMarais. So I just think from an impact standpoint, I expect all three of these guys to be phenomenal. I expect Arvids and Don to probably fight for UFA Rookie of the Year this year. But I think Arvids, just from a role and responsibility and a superpower standpoint, he's also like people don't realize how big this dude is and how athletic he is.
Real tall.
And if you haven't watched Arvids Karklin's play, I suggest going back and watching one of the world's club games from 2022 when he was playing for the Belgian team, the Mooncatchers. And like he was kind of a pickup for this team. He's from Latvia. It's a Belgian team. He and a couple other Latvians joined them. And there was just no doubt that he was going to be on the field for Universe Point and just like one of the most important players. And he was like 20 or 21 years old at that time. So, yeah, I'm really excited to see him with the Rush. I don't know if he'll finish the season with the best stats. I don't know if, I mean, I don't think he will finish the season with the most wins of these guys that we're talking about. But the question wasn't stats or wins, it was impact. And because of
Mm-hmm.
the role he's going to have and the responsibility and his high ceiling capabilities, that is my direct answer.
No, it's a great answer. I've got Karklins on my finalist list as well as both of the Belgians, Demarais and De Crana. I don't think there's any question as to them being stars in this league. I think for me with Karklins, he's going to finish. If he has the season, I think we're all kind of expecting from him. I think he could finish as a top 5 to 10 scorer within this league at the end of the 2025 season. My concern with Karklins is that he also ends up as one of the top 5 to 10 most turnovered players in the 2025 season, just because he's going to be filling up that shot chart in that Rush offense as they kind of reconfigure everything. And just to defend my Wolf choice for a second, you were talking about highlights and maybe volume production. One of the words that you use to define Karklins, I actually think of when I think of Wolf: responsibility. I thought your description of Wolf as being sort of a player that pays attention to the details, great at breakthroughs, setting up the offense. Those are exactly the pieces that Seattle needed outside of the Garrett Martins, the Zeppelin Ronegs, the Tommy Lee, the Christian Foster, the highlight potential of that Skades team. They had that in spades everywhere else. What they needed last year was Wolf, somebody who got the block after the turn in a spot where they couldn't afford the opposition to get the break score. The guy who was just carving up his respective defender with breakthroughs and setting everyone up across the field. I think that kind of responsibility, as you put it, is what makes Wolf so valuable to me. And again, I'm not here to discuss talent of these guys. All of them are probably some of the best players within their given country. And then they just come over here and we get to celebrate them as the stars in their respective teams. But
you'll appreciate this, though. From an impact standpoint, I'm thinking social media clicks, highlights, and Wolf is not going to make the
Karklins is
big
impossible. Karklins is
Karklins
impossible to define there. Like he's a moon catcher.
You know who would have been a sneaky mention that neither of us threw out there? But is
Thomas
Ken
Edmonds?
Bond? No, well, he's dual citizen. He's
Canadian,
half American.
Canadian superstar Thomas Edmonds.
Kenton Bono has scored
Ooh,
83
yeah.
goals in a 12-game season. He is now option A again for the downfield cutting core of the Montreal Royale offense.
Yep.
There's a reason I didn't pick him, but just throwing the name out there as a back burner candidate. Like, would you be stunned if Kenton Bono led the UFA in goals this year? Like, that doesn't
No.
seem out of the question at all.
No, and I actually, from everything I've heard from Montreal, he's due for a little bit of a rejuvenation season where he reminds everyone exactly what people kind of learned about in the 2019 All-Star game, where everyone showed up to the field and they go, "Who's the quiet French guy?" Until he's just beating everyone to the spot, and Rowan's figuring out mid-game, "Oh, I can just put it up to where Quinton's running," and he just go gets. Like,
Yeah.
Bonad is one of the most seamless scorers in this league's history, and I feel like you're absolutely right. He could be making some big noise from the up and under. Maybe that's actually where we should transition into one of your next questions about which team can
Oh.
potentially orchestrate the biggest upset in the 2025 season.
Yeah, well, the basis of this question, one, is to give us a chance to talk about some of the teams that we haven't been focusing on. But
Mm-hmm.
two, like, one of the things I really like about our league right now is that I feel like we have more professional teams than ever. And, like, obviously, Evan, but like what I mean by that is, like, when you watch the NBA, like, on any given night, anybody can beat anybody. And, like, a mediocre NBA team still has dudes that can go get buckets against the best teams in the league and get hot for a quarter, and if they're not trying to tank, can win the game.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm thinking about that in regards to the teams that we perceive going into the season as like the non-contenders, and I think one of them will get an upset in the course of the season against like a team that goes to championship weekend. So the
Mm-hmm.
question is, which team has the best chance of being that squad when they're at their best with their ceiling? Like, maybe they're not a playoff team themselves, but they can knock off a playoff team with their personnel on the right day.
Mm-hmm. I've got two teams in mind, of course, because I'm always split between two things. Uh, and I'll give them both, but I'll pick one. The two teams are Pittsburgh and Montreal. I think both kind of offer an interesting set of lineups for opponents to handle. I think Montreal is going to be tougher defensively than a lot of teams are granting them. And I think Pittsburgh is going to be able to possess on offense and just keep control and game management of the overall clock in a way that is could become frustrating for Central Division opponents to crack through. But my singular choice will be Montreal, and that will be because there's just so much competition between the prospective top four teams in that division in Boston, DC, New York, and Toronto entering 2025 that I just feel like of those four teams, someone's going to have to deal with lowered expectations. And I feel like the Royale are going to be the squad to remind one of those four teams that, hey, maybe you set your sights a little too high for this season. Again, we were just talking about Bonad. They've got one of the best throwers in league history and Kevin Quinlan feeding him the disc. There's still some tremendous talent scattered throughout this Royale roster. They've got motivation with DeCrana joining Boston. You talk with anyone within that Royale organization, and they are lit up from underneath about trying to prove that they are a better team than just one individual. And so I just think that there's a lot of kind of stars coalescing around Montreal being a giant monkey wrench in that East Division. I don't know which opponent, which week win, but I think at some point they're going to kind of come up from under. I mean, we've talked about before in the show. They almost beat Boston at home in the middle of the season. They almost beat DC at home. They did beat Boston in the final weekend of the regular season, but Glory were kind of resting some starters. They had already secured a home playoff game at that point. But again, like Royale were playing teams close last year. I know that they lose DeCrana. I know that that's major for this Montreal franchise, but they're getting a lot of youth talent developing. They still have really good 1-2 punches on offense. I just really like this Montreal team throughout the years as far as competitors. And so I just think that they're going to make life difficult for the teams at the top of that East Division.
I'm going to pull an Adam and pick two teams as well.
Pulling
And
Adam, damn.
yeah, and I think there will be a monkey wrench team in the East Division as you described it. But I think it's the Philadelphia Phoenix. They have long been the monkey
Yeah.
wrench team in the East. And you look at the roster that they have back, like, yes, they lose James Pollard. They've got a new coaching staff. But, like, a lot of the guys that were key players for the team that made it to the playoffs a few years back are still around. And, Greg Martin is one of those guys that on any given day, he could score 12 goals. And obviously, Sean Mott is a special player. He was dealing with an injury last year that really limited him. I think he's going to be back healthy. I expect a nice bounce back year from him. Paul Owens, a really talented defender. Like,
Mm-hmm.
I don't think Philly's going to make the playoffs, but I think they are. I mean, we have seen them so many times come this freaking close to getting the Empire and the Breeze. By the way, Empire Phoenix this weekend, preseason ultimate. Let's go. Watch UFA.tv. Super excited to just watch Ultimate again. And I don't look, we need to be very careful, Adam. We are not going to draw major conclusions from this game next week on the pod.
Preseason Frisbee, it's like preseason NFL. Yeah, we'd be doing our jobs a real disservice if we were to take away much from those performances.
And yet, we're still going to watch.
Yeah, absolutely. Because that's a perfect segue into my next big question.
Well, I got one more team though. Before we go.
Oh, right, you have two picks. You're pulling a me. I guess we gotta wait. Now I know how it feels.
The segue from Montreal to Philly was too good. No one is talking about the Los Angeles Aviators.
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely no one. And they've got two interdivisional games that are eminently winnable, I think, against Oregon and Vegas. And then, they got games against Houston that it feels like are kind of 50-50s. And then every other game that they've got is, a rival, San Diego, who they played a lot, Atlanta, Austin. I just think that it's easy to get lured into the gravitational pull of Pavel. They're like, well, they don't have Pavel anymore. They lose Van Dusen. They got rid of Jeff Landisman. Like, it's a rebuilding year. And it is a rebuilding year. But they've got a lot of guys that have played at championship weekend. And a lot of veterans on this team, from Sean McDougall to Michael Keough to Zach Shackner to Garrett Santee to Mitchell Steiner. Like, just dudes that are not going into the season thinking, yeah, we're going to go 2-10. Like, that is just not what their mindset is. I think they're realistic, but they also are going to go into every game thinking that they have a chance to win. And I think that at some point during the season, especially if they have a mediocre record, someone's going to overlook them. And on the right day, they've got the right combination of talent and young players that are unknown that are going to be known by the end of the season to make something happen. So LA was really the team that I had in mind most when I came up with this question. Like, okay. I don't think they're going to make the playoffs, but I also don't think they're going to get swept by San Diego 4 straight games. And would it surprise me if they got a win on the right day, like against Atlanta traveling cross country? Or against Austin? Like, no, I would not be shocked at all. I think after looking at this Aviators team a little bit more closely, I'm higher on them now than I was going into the season. Now, I think I also said going into last year, like, look at the Dallas Legion. Look at all the guys they have that played at championship weekend. This is an underrated, overlooked team. That is also a possibility as well, that they have a brutal season like the Legion did last year from a win standpoint. So, I just wanted to mention the Aviators because I do think they are interesting, and they are a franchise that we have seen kind of surprise you and win games that maybe you didn't think they were going to win. They had the year from hell last year. I expect them to be a far more competitive team in 2025.
Yeah, and whenever I underrate the LA franchise is usually when they punch up into a feisty like 6-6 team. I've done it a couple times throughout the years. I believe in 2019 and in 2021 most famously. I kind of sunk them a little bit in my power rankings, and then they come out and win a couple of competitive close games against teams I assume to be better. So LA is a great selection. And I'll just say, kind of everyone beyond Atlanta and Carolina in that newly aligned South Division that now includes LA, San Diego, Houston, and Austin, aside from the previously mentioned Atlanta and Carolina.
Mm-hmm.
Those other four teams, I feel like we really need to get a better sense of what they're capable of within this first month of play, because I just have no idea what really to expect. They all kind of have interesting pieces. They've all got a bunch of youth as well. They're not super established programs outside of the cores on San Diego and LA. So just kind of seeing what those teams have to show, and can they maybe, like to your point, throw in a monkey wrench against the presumed favorites at the top of the division in the Hustle and the
Adam,
Flyers.
you have motivated the Austin Soul by putting them 15th in your preseason power
I
rankings
motivate
because
everyone by putting fake numbers next to their team names. Have we not put that together at this point? Everyone who's not in the top 10 loves to come back around and say, oh, you undersold us. A couple
Adam,
years ago, it was Chicago. It's been Austin a few times. LA is coming for me. I hate Houston, apparently. I'm
you're a
sure San
disrespectful
Diego,
monster
Philly.
that needs to be stopped is really the bottom line.
I am. I know. I know this about myself, so there's at least that. Does that make it better? Probably not.
We got two questions that we got to plow through in like 10 minutes.
We do. So you ruined my segue from New York a second ago, so I'm gonna reel it back in. You know, they're facing off against the Philly Phoenix this weekend, April 5th, in a preseason matchup. It's going to be a really interesting, I think, just glimpse at this Empire team, given the massive amount of defensive exodus on their roster and all of the new additions. You talk about Calvin Brown, Max Shepard, Everest Shapiro, Oliver Fay, Dmitry Suvorov. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple others. My question is, are we seeing the end of the New York dynasty? You know, I think we saw the tip over the very peak of it last year. You know, they get bounced out of the first round of the playoffs. They experienced 5 losses total, including the postseason, which is more than they had in the previous 4 years combined, you know? And so is this Empire team on the descend? Did they lose too much talent, particularly on the defensive side of the disc, where they were already struggling in 2024? I mean, this Empire team, again, not to just keep belaboring this point, they have stars on offense. What won them those 3 titles in 5 years or in 4 seasons was their defensive play and the way that they just put a blanket over opposing offenses. That is in the past now. The Dross are gone. Breton Tan's gone. John Randolph may be switching over to offense here as the New York team experiments with lineups. Like, this New York team was already kind of incapable at generating defensive pressure last year. Are they going to struggle even more? Where do you see this Empire team coming in 2025?
Well, that's a different question than is the dynasty over. So,
Fine. Is the dynasty over?
I think the dynasty as we knew it is over.
Okay.
But that doesn't mean they can't win a championship this year. But it is a different team.
Oh,
they're
I'm
about
trying to split that hair.
Well, they're about 50% different than last year. Like, look, there are 3 guys I think still left that like played in the 2019 championship game. I think it's just Yacht, Williams, and Marquez. Like, they have a couple like, you know, secondary, tertiary, like Noriaki Toe was, I think, on that 2019 roster, but was an important piece. He's still on the roster now. I think it's a new era. It might be the start of a new dynasty in New York, quite frankly. And we can quibble as to whether it is a continuation of the last dynasty, But to me, it feels like the start of something new because this team is going to be led, like obviously Williams and Yacht are going to be important players for them. But I think kind of the foundation of this team is John Randolph and Calvin Brown and some of the new pieces they've added that you mentioned. I think, some really young, exciting names that the Empire are really excited about, but we haven't really discussed. Like Ethan Lehman is one of the top college players in the country right now playing for UMass. Like he's not going to be around for the start of the season, but he will be a key member of the Empire down the stretch if he's healthy. Anthony Nunez is really excited about this high school kid named Sam McCrory, who he coached in YCC with Devil as we go full circle. And just like he describes him as like a senior in high school, but adult level athleticism. I mean, he said, he's got an old soul. He's got the athleticism of a 25-year-old. He's got the mind of a 35-year-old. That's high praise for a kid that we've never watched before, but like
Mm-hmm.
it gets me excited to see what he can do in the UFA level. So, yeah, I think this New York team is a championship contender still, without a doubt. But I also think, like, the dynasty that I think of is the team that went undefeated 3 times in 4 years, the
Mm-hmm.
team that went to 4 straight championship games. And I just think the league right now is too good to like envision this New York team going 12-0 and going on another run like that. But like, would it surprise me if they win double digit games 3 of the next 4 years and play in 3 of the next 4 championships? No, I wouldn't be surprised at all. But I view that kind of as the start of the next dynasty. So I think, they no longer have the dross. They lose Oliver. They lose Elliot Chartok. They still have Oliver. I think that there's been enough change that I feel like it's kind of the beginning of something new for New York.
I'll grant it. I don't quite follow the logic of if they won a title this year, it would be a new dynasty, even though it would only be, like a year separating from their last title. I understand that the roster turnover point that you're making, but just just trying to square some of those edges. But I hear you. And I think I agree with you. I do think it's kind of the end of the New York Empire as we have come to know them. And I'm interested to see what they're going to have in this next iteration. What the Shepherd Brown, reimagining of this roster is going to bring. But we've only got a few more minutes left, so we've got to turn this last question into a bit of a shotgun, right? We've got to really slam this one down. But I'm wondering, as one of the teams that has had some of the most hype over the offseason, this Colorado Summit squad. I think we've all been talking for the past few years about how talented they are. Is 2025 finally the year where the Summit fully realize that level of talent?
It's such a hard question because I
Because it's
certainly
all
don't.
there, right?
Well,
It's
yeah, like
so there.
yeah, to your point, I don't trust them, but I also can't count them out of having kind of the light bulb go on collectively. And I've talked about it and written about it. I really like their team. I really like their pieces. I really like their situation this year from a schedule standpoint. I think it fits them way better than last year's team did with the circumstances that they dealt with. So yeah, I mean, look, we talked about it in the over-unders last week. I think I picked them over and sort of intimated that I have them winning the West Division. So, yeah, I think they are ready, but I also don't totally trust them. And
Mm-hmm.
they're in my mind like one of those teams that I'd like to think their floor is at a level where there are certain games that they're just not going to lose. But again, I don't trust them. And they need to show that in close games late, especially on the road, that they can be a little bit more poised and mature and steady than they were last year. Because the team that we saw last year was a long ways away from being a championship contender. Now, they weren't that far away from being like a West Division title contender, but there's a big gap, and we've seen it year after year. where West Division teams often endure lopsided defeats at championship weekend. Like, I think on paper, the Summit have a team to be a championship contender, but right now it's more about being a West Division title contender and playing at a level that befits being compared to New York, DC, Chicago, Carolina, Atlanta, Minnesota, etc.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think for me, it's just not quite there yet. I agree with you. I need to see more trust on the on-field results. Again, you look at this roster, you see what they're bringing in with Tobias Brooks and Keenan Lawrence and some of the other talent that they've added throughout the offseason. This team clearly has a lot of gears that they can shift into. It's just whether or not they can really navigate into those spaces. But you think about in some of those close results and losses that the Summit had last year, doesn't a player like Tobias Brooks reverse a couple of those 1 and 2 goal losses on the road? I mean, specifically their road trip through the Central Division facing Madison and then Minnesota. Those are ones where I think if the 2025 Summit roster show up to those games, they're kind of taking a drastically different approach than last year. So I just don't know where to settle on with this Colorado team, particularly with some of the roster shakeup in the last couple of weeks. It feels like once again they're going to be volatile, but what does that mean in terms of their win-loss record? There's going to be highlights. There's going to be the moments from them for sure, but where are they going to end up in the standings? I think to your point, top of the division is absolutely where their ceiling exists. I'm just worried about where that floor is, because that has been kind of a trap door the past 2 seasons where, yeah, they can hang with the best, but man, they can't lose these games continually.
Yeah, no doubt. I think they are the type of team that, their record is going to say a lot. And in a weird way, like, it's going to be more about the eye test for me than the numbers and the record. And that may
Mm-hmm.
not be totally fair to them, but, like, I have the luxury, Adam, as you know, of traveling around and getting to see these teams in person.
Mm-hmm.
And, there's like going to watch New York, DC is different than going to watch Salt Lake, Colorado. Different style of play, different level of precision. And, you know, I I would like to see Colorado rise up to that level. And I think with the pieces that they're adding, with the right mindset and right leadership, they can get there. But that's kind of how I'm going to be judging them, which may not be totally fair because they went 6-6 last year and missed the playoffs. But like, we had these high expectations for them last year, and Tobias Brooks is a really special talent. Uh, he played for the new Flyers coach Mike Avilas. Mike Avila. Keeps Mike Avilas used to be a second baseman for the Red Sox, and he's different from Mike Avila, who's the new
Your
coach of the Carolina
Boston
Flyers.
sports fandom
And that's
finally betrays you. Yes,
hour
yes,
and 20 minutes into
yes.
the podcast. I get the Boston sports mention of little known utility infielder Mike Avilas. Um,
Yes.
we couldn't miss that. Uh,
No.
yeah. Can I ask you one question real quick as we wrap up?
Sure.
Um, what I wrote for the Tuesday toss this past week, I'd just be curious to get your general reaction. You edited the piece and posted it. Like, what were your like? I didn't. My intention wasn't to be controversial. I was just kind of sharing what I think, but I feel like it could be perceived as controversial. So I'm curious, just kind of what your reaction was to what I wrote, and if you think I got it right or got it wrong, and maybe this is the lead to next week's pod because I don't want to introduce another 10-minute conversation. But just was curious to get your reaction.
So just to catch listeners up, if you haven't already, go over to the watchufa.com website. Evan Lepler wrote a fantastic Tuesday toss talking about 10 players who he believes could be most impacted by a title win in 2025. And I thought it was a really well thought out piece. I especially liked kind of your prologue about if you're a player, please do something else with this time. And of course, you received a couple of candid messages from players who did not heed your advice, read
It's
through
true.
the entire piece, and issued their thoughts back to you. So I appreciated the way in which you kind of conducted the whole thing. I come at sports, I think, from a more narrative and storytelling approach than I do from the kind of ends justify the means, championships fuel everything sort of discourse that I feel is permeating throughout sports media right now. I understand the importance of winning a championship. I think that that's been communicated excessively on this show. I just don't think it's as much of a definition on individual players as we in the media and punditry class like to make it out to be. Like, I don't think that Brett Halsmeyer not having a championship yet defines his career much at all. I don't think that the last 2 playoff losses can be saddled onto his big shoulders. I think he's been demonstrably too good of a player and too good of a teammate to just allow the sort of collective results to have an effect on who he's been for the Atlanta franchise. And I think that kind of goes for any of those given players. Now, I totally concede to your points of, but what if they did? It just, it gets back to some of my central frustrations in sports coverage in general, right? Like, Charles Barkley isn't a worse player because he never won a title. Like, again, these players that you've mentioned aren't going to be misremembered as not legends because they don't have a piece of hardware. Rowan McDonald, in particular, will exceed everything as far as what he's accomplished on the field through his work as an ambassador on the global scale, right? I mean, he's the throw god, essentially, and he's going to be known for those kinds of results rather than the win-loss of the DC Breeze. I just think that some of the championship talk consolidates a little too much of what we want to explore with some of these athletes. And I want to mention, you left off somebody who I think absolutely deserves a little blurb on there in Jay Frood. I mean, that's somebody who played for the Dallas Roughnecks immediately after they won their first title, didn't get a championship with them, left Madison immediately before they won their 2018 title, and, you know, ironically enough, played them at Breeze Stevens for that title in 2018. He's now in the Colorado Summit. He made a championship weekend appearance with them in 2022 during their inaugural season when he was a cornerstone signing. He's one of the top top scorers in league history, one of the top block getters. You talk about highlight impact. I mean, geez, I know we're a little bit beyond the Frood peak years, but there wasn't a more electrifying athlete 2015 and 2016 than Jay Frood. And again, it just kind of gets to my point. Like, you left Jay Frood off of that list, and it's not like we consider Frood's career to be any sort of diminished by his lack of hardware. And it could be equally said for his teammate, which could have also been on that list, Matt Jackson. That guy's been a consummate winner and fantastic teammate throughout his career in this league.
Matty's got a title.
Oh, right. He did. Shoot. He did win in 2016.
You're good.
I forgot he was. How could I forget? He was Mr. Rundown off the pole and get a block on the first throw for that Roughnecks team.
He was. Who is this guy in 2016?
I got to meet his father because his father was in the VIP fan class for championship weekend, and he was up in the booth spectating from the broadcaster side as the Roughnecks won their title. And he was so nice and just so thrilled to be watching his son out there. Shout out to John Jackson and the Jackson family. Good group of people. But anyways, I just think I think the title talk can consolidate stuff in a way where I like to explore, again, as you kind of called it earlier, the Ruffner rule or something, where I like to choose 2 things at a time. So it's about the winning, it's about the titles, it's about, you know, who summits the league at the end of the season, and it's also about all this other stuff, right?
Pun intended or no pun intended?
Not pun intended. This one time.
All right.
But that should do it for this episode of Swing Pass. We've been rambling on long enough. And we're really, again, barreling towards the start of the 2025 season. Just 3 weeks away, April 24th. That's a Thursday night. Don't be confused. But there will be games throughout that weekend on the 24th, 25th, and 26th. We will, of course, be previewing more and more as we get closer to those dates. We wrap up here and now on the podcast, but Evan and I will be back next weekend to discuss more UFA 2025 previews. You're going to want to tune in for that, but bye for now.
See ya.